When my mom first mentioned Rick, I didn't pay much attention. He's one of the few people at work who still treats me like a human being, she said casually one evening while washing dishes. That was enough to make him sound special. My mom, Sarah, didn't hand out trust easily anymore. After everything she'd been through, anyone who made her feel safe at work stood out immediately. He brings me coffee when I'm buried in reports, she added. He actually listens when I talk. I smiled. I like him already, I said. I shouldn't have. Rick had been at the company even longer than my mom. Mid-50s. Always polite. Always quiet. The kind of man who blended into the background so well you almost forgot he was there. He never raised his voice. Never caused trouble. Never stood out. Which, as I later learned, was exactly the point. At that time, my mom had already rebuilt her life after being fired from her old job. She was working again, this time for a mid-sized logistics firm outside Columbus, Ohio. Nothing fancy, but stable. She wasn't desperate anymore. She was careful, and Rick knew it. He sat next to her in the office, shared lunch with her sometimes, listened while she talked about me, about rebuilding her savings, about learning to trust again. I think he's just lonely, she told me one night. He never talks about his family, or so she thought. The first sign that something was wrong came with a promotion. My mom had been shortlisted for operations supervisor. For weeks, she stayed late, prepared process improvements, helped train new staff. Rick encouraged her constantly. You deserve this, Sarah, he told her. They finally see your value. She believed him. So did I. And then, one Friday morning, the email went out. Rick got the promotion. Not my mom. Rick. She stared at the screen in disbelief. He said he didn't even apply, she whispered to me on the phone. He told me he didn't want the stress. By the end of that day, her access to the shared project folders had been revoked. The projects she had built, the processes she had created, all reassigned to Rick. At first, she tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe management decided, she said. Maybe he had nothing to do with it. But then came the meeting. Rick stood at the front of the room and presented her work as his own. My mom sat frozen, page by page, slide by slide, her spreadsheets, her charts, her handwritten notes, digitized, even her phrasing. At the end, the director smiled. Excellent work, Rick. This is exactly the kind of leadership we need. Rick didn't look at my mom once. Not once. That night, she came home silent. She didn't cry. That scared me more. He stole everything, she finally said. And I helped him do it. That's when she understood. Rick had been asking questions for months. How do you build your reports? Where do you store these files? Who approves these workflows? She thought he was learning. He was mapping. She went to HR the next week. They listened. Politely. Too politely. We'll look into it, they said. 2 days later, she was written up for performance inconsistencies. Rick filed the complaint. The same Rick who used to bring her coffee. That night, she finally cried. I trusted him, she said. I trusted him after everything. That broke something in her. Not her strength. Her innocence. What Rick didn't know was that Sarah had learned something from the last battle. Documentation. Proof. While helping him over those months. She had kept copies of everything. Old hard drives. USB backups. Timestamps. Version histories. She hadn't known why she was doing it. She just knew she should. She didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, she quietly requested a full audit of the shared drive from IT, framing it as a data loss concern. Rick supported the request. Confident, calm, arrogant. He assumed she had nothing. 3 weeks later, the IT manager called my mom into his office. His face was pale. Sarah, he said slowly, why do half of Rick's project files originate from your login credentials, with earlier timestamps? Her heart started racing. Because they are mine, she said. That same afternoon, internal investigators were brought in. HR stopped smiling. Rick stopped bringing coffee. When they confronted him, he denied everything, until the forensic audit began. Login trails, edit histories, cloud sync records, email forwards. Everything led back to him. Not only that, they uncovered something much worse. Rick had been altering safety compliance reports to make his department look more efficient. Small changes, tiny lies. That could have caused massive liability. The company shut down his access immediately. Security escorted him out, in front of everyone, the same way he once watched my mom sit silently. But the real shock came a week later. A federal investigation opened, because those altered compliance reports had been sent to regulatory agencies, which meant fraud, false reporting, potential criminal charges. My mom didn't celebrate. She felt empty. "I didn't want revenge," she said quietly. "I just wanted the truth." The truth came harder than anyone expected. Rick tried to contact her from an unknown number. She didn't answer. He left a voicemail, his voice trembling. "Sarah, I was desperate. I just wanted a chance. You already had everything. I thought you wouldn't need it. Everything." At 62, starting over, again, the company fully reinstated her position, with back pay, and offered a formal apology. But this time, my mom declined the promotion. "I'm done climbing ladders that lean against broken walls," she said. Instead, she accepted a consulting role. Less stress, more control, higher pay, freedom. The last I heard, Rick lost everything. Job, reputation, career. All because he believed stealing would be faster than building. One evening, months later, my mom and I sat on the porch watching the sun sink behind the Ohio skyline. "I used to think trusting people made me weak," she said. "Now I know it made me brave. But blindness, that made me vulnerable." She took my hand. But this time, I kept my eyes open. My mom was betrayed by a coworker at work. And in trying to bury her, he exposed his own secret instead. And you, if someone you trusted stole your work, your ideas, your future, would you stay silent, or would you let the truth speak for you? Tell me what you'd do. And if you want more real stories like my mom's, don't forget to like and subscribe. Because sometimes the greatest justice doesn't come from revenge. It comes from exposure. At first, the company tried to contain everything quietly. Official statements, closed-door meetings, emails with the word confidential stamped across the top. They told employees it was an internal compliance review. But when federal agents show up in dark jackets with badges on their belts, no amount of corporate language can turn that into a routine audit. It stopped being internal the day the government walked in. My mom was in her office when it happened. 2 agents from the Department of Labor. 1 from the Office of the Inspector General. Straight posture. Calm voices. No threats. No shouting. Just quiet authority. "Ma'am, we need to ask you a few questions about altered compliance reports." Her hands didn't shake this time. She had already lived through fear. "This is about Rick, isn't it?" she asked. They exchanged a glance. "Yes, it is." They interviewed her for 2 hours. She showed them everything. Her backup files, the original reports, the timestamps, her emails. The agent's expressions hardened with every piece of evidence. One of them finally said, "This isn't just workplace misconduct, Mrs. Miller. This is federal fraud." That same afternoon, Rick was arrested. Not at home, not in some quiet hallway, at the parking lot of a grocery store, handcuffed, in front of strangers, in front of cameras, because someone always films everything now. The news moved faster than the truth. By nightfall, the headline was everywhere online. Operations manager arrested in federal fraud probe. But the second headline followed quickly. Whistleblower identified as senior analyst Sarah Miller. My mom sat on the couch staring at the TV. "They're calling me a whistleblower," she whispered. "You are," I said. Rick's lawyer tried to flip the script within 24 hours. Public statement, damage control, claims of misunderstanding. They said my mom had fabricated evidence out of bitterness. They said she was unstable from past trauma. They said she wanted revenge. The same old pattern. Control the narrative. Burn the woman. That's when the subpoenas started. On Rick's personal accounts. On his emails. On his bank records. And that's when investigators found something else. Money. Not bonuses. Not salary. Bribes. Small payments. Third-party transfers. Consulting fees from shell companies tied to vendors. Rick hadn't only been lying about reports. He had been taking money to manipulate safety metrics, which meant endangering workers, which meant criminal negligence, which meant prison. 3 former employees came forward, then 5, then 9, all with the same story. Rick pressured them. Rick manipulated reports. Rick threatened their jobs. One man broke down during testimony. They told us to change the numbers or lose our livelihood. I have kids. I couldn't risk it. The system had eaten its own people. My mom received federal witness protection status, not the dramatic kind from movies, the quiet kind. Legal shielding, secure communication, no direct contact with the defendant. When the officer explained it, I felt cold. "This is serious," I whispered. My mom just nodded. "I know," she said. "That's why I didn't walk away." Rick tried to reach her again. From jail. Through his lawyer. The request was denied. Then he tried through mutual coworkers. Ignored. He left a final message through court correspondence. "Tell Sarah I never meant for it to get this big." That sentence told us everything. He only meant it to be theft, not destruction. He only meant to win, not to be exposed. The trial took 11 months. 11 months of hearings, depositions, forensic accountants, technical experts. The prosecution stacked evidence like bricks, and brick by brick, his defense collapsed. The verdict came on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting next to my mom in the courthouse. She held my hand tightly, but her grip was steady. No shaking, no fear. The judge spoke clearly. On all counts of federal fraud, falsification of records, and conspiracy to commit regulatory deception, the defendant is found guilty. Rick didn't look at us. He looked straight at the floor. Sentence: 9 years in federal prison. No early parole option. The room went silent. Not dramatic silence. A heavy one. The kind that changes lives. As they led him away in restraints, he finally turned his head. Our eyes met. For just 1 second. In that second, I saw regret, shock, and something else. The realization that no one was coming to save him. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded my mom. Microphones. Cameras. Questions fired like bullets. How does it feel to win? Do you feel vindicated? Do you forgive him? She answered calmly. I didn't come here to win. I came here to stop a lie before it killed someone. Then she turned, took my hand, and walked away. No interviews, no slogans, just truth. Rick's secrets didn't die with his conviction. The investigation expanded. 2 company executives were forced to resign. 1 faced charges. A multi-million-dollar settlement was paid to affected workers. A new federal oversight was placed on the company, all triggered by one woman refusing to stay silent. 3 months later, my mom received a letter from the Department of Labor. Inside was an official commendation. For cooperation, for integrity, for preventing further harm. She placed it in a small frame in her living room. Not out of pride, out of closure. One evening, as the sun set orange behind the rooftops, she said something I'll never forget. "Do you know what the scariest part is?" she asked. "What?" I said. "He didn't destroy his life the day he was arrested. He destroyed it the first day he chose to lie. My mom was betrayed by a coworker at work, and by trying to steal her future, he exposed not just his secret, but his entire crime. And you, if the truth could cost someone their freedom, would you still be brave enough to speak it? Tell me what you'd do. Because sometimes, justice is not just emotional. Sometimes, it's federal." After the trial ended, after the cameras disappeared, after the reporters moved on to the next scandal, silence filled the space where fear used to live. At first, that silence felt unnatural. Too clean, too quiet, too empty. For the first time in years, no one was threatening my mom. No one was calling her. No one was using her name in court documents. And strangely, that was the hardest part. My mom didn't cry the day Rick was sentenced. She didn't cry the week after either. But one night, 3 months later, I heard it. Soft sobbing coming from her bedroom. Not the loud kind, the heavy kind. The kind that comes from exhaustion finally being allowed to breathe. "I don't understand why I feel sad," she confessed the next morning as we sat at the kitchen table. "I won. He's in prison. My name is clear. Everything worked out." I held her hand. "You're not mourning him," I said. "You're mourning who you were before all this." She looked at me like I had just named something she couldn't explain. For years, survival had been her entire identity. She survived unfair bosses. She survived being replaced. She survived being betrayed. She survived having her life stolen in pieces. Now that survival was no longer required, she felt lost. The first sign of change came when she stopped waking up at 5 a.m. For decades, she had trained her body to wake before danger, before deadlines, before anxiety, before the world could demand something from her. But now, the alarm stayed silent, and for the first time in her adult life, she slept until the sun found her. One afternoon, I came home and saw her sitting on the floor of the living room, surrounded by old boxes, photos, journals, sketchbooks. "I forgot I used to draw," she said softly, holding a charcoal pencil. She hadn't drawn in over 20 years, not because she didn't love it, because survival had no room for beauty. That night, she drew for 6 hours straight, hands black with charcoal, music playing softly, windows open. It was the first time I saw her disappear into something that wasn't fear. The nightmares came later, not about Rick, not about Court, but about the version of herself she buried to survive. She dreamed she was trying to scream, and had no mouth. She dreamed she kept running into locked doors. She dreamed she was in an office with no windows. Every morning she woke trembling. A therapist later explained it to her. When the danger ends, the nervous system finally releases what it's been holding. That release feels like collapse, before it becomes peace. My mom started walking again. Not for errands, not for obligations. Just walking, slowly. Sometimes for miles, sometimes to nowhere. Sometimes just to feel the world still existed beyond courtrooms and offices. One day, weeks later, she came home with a stray dog. Small, dirty, shaking. "They were going to put him down," she said. "He wouldn't stop shaking. They said he had too much trauma." She smiled faintly. "So do I." They healed together. The mail started changing too. No more legal notices. No subpoenas. No threats. Instead, letters from strangers. "I was too afraid to report my boss until I saw your story. Because of you, my mom finally left her abusive job. Thank you for proving women over 60 are not invisible." My mom read every single one, and cried at every single one, not with pain, with meaning. But healing is not linear. One night, months later, she finally said what she had been holding inside since the verdict. "I don't know who I am without fighting." That sentence broke my heart. For so long, her identity had been built from resistance. Now she had to build it from desire. So she tried new things: pottery classes, yoga, a community choir, an art co-op downtown. Some felt wrong, some felt empty. Until one day, she started teaching, not career skills, life skills, at a small women's center in Cleveland, once a week, for free. The first class only had 3 women. By the 6th month, there were 27, women who had been silenced, minimized, discarded, replaced, gaslit. My mom never spoke as a hero, only as someone who had survived and refused to disappear. One evening after class, a young woman approached her. "I thought if I stayed quiet long enough they'd stop," she whispered. My mom placed her hands gently over hers. "They only stop when you stop shrinking." That sentence traveled farther than either of us expected. A year passed, then another. Rick's name faded from headlines, from memory, from power. But my mom's name did something different. It rooted. Women quoted her in meetings. Students wrote dissertations about her case. Law schools invited her again. But she always said no now. "I already spoke," she said. "Now I live." On her 65th birthday, we stood on the beach in Oregon watching the waves crash under a violet sky. She had never traveled before all this. Not really. She turned to me with tears in her eyes. "For the first time in my life," she said, "I feel like time belongs to me." My mom was betrayed by a coworker. He exposed his own secret. He went to prison. But the real sentence was the one she gave to her past. And the real freedom was the one she finally gave herself. And you, if everything that broke you was suddenly gone, would you know who you are without the pain? Sometimes the hardest part isn't surviving the storm. It's learning how to breathe after it ends. Healing doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly, disguised as restlessness. About 2 years after the trial, my mom started having a strange feeling she couldn't explain. "I feel unsettled," she said one morning. Not sad, not scared, just unfinished. She had rebuilt her life. She taught at the Women's Center. She painted. She traveled. From the outside, Everything looked whole again. But inside, there was a room she had never re-entered. She told me one night what that room was. "I never grieved the woman I was before all of this," she whispered. "I was so busy surviving that I skipped that part." So she decided to do something that terrified her more than court ever did. She went back to her old company building, not to confront anyone, just to stand in the place where she had once disappeared. The parking lot looked smaller than she remembered. The doors were the same. The lobby smelled the same. But she was not the same woman who had once walked through it shrinking. She stood there for a long time, hands trembling. "I don't hate this place anymore," she said softly. "That's how I know I'm free." That night, something broke open inside her. Not anger, grief. Grief for the years she spent apologizing for existing. Grief for the dreams she postponed. Grief for the girl she once was before fear taught her how to fold. She cried for hours. Not the loud kind. The grieving kind. The kind that finally clears space. A week later, she signed up for a retreat in the mountains of Colorado. A silent retreat. No phones, no mirrors, no distractions. Just days of walking, breathing, writing. She almost backed out. "What if I don't like what I find when it's quiet?" she asked. "Then at least you'll finally meet her," I said. When she came back, she looked different. Not younger. Lighter. "They teach you something strange there," she told me. "That suffering ends when you stop demanding meaning from it." That sentence stayed with her, and with me, but the deepest confrontation was still waiting. It came in the form of a letter, from Rick. It arrived 3 years into his sentence. Handwritten. Careful. My mom stared at the envelope for a long time. Then she placed it in the drawer. Unopened. For weeks. One night, after a particularly heavy class at the Women's Center, she took it out. "I think I'm ready," she said. She opened it slowly. Rick wrote 10 pages. Not excuses, not threats, confessions. He described how fear ruled his life, how failure haunted him, how watching my mom's quiet competence made him feel small, how stealing felt easier than becoming. He ended with one sentence. "I did not destroy you." I only revealed that I had already destroyed myself. My mom read the letter twice, then folded it, then burned it in the sink. Not in rage, in closure. She never wrote back, not because she was cruel, because she was done. 7 years after the betrayal, my mom no longer introduces herself as a survivor. She introduces herself as a teacher, not because she instructs, but because women find their voices faster when they see someone who already reclaimed hers. The Women's Center expanded. Her once tiny class became part of a full program. They named it quietly, the Sarah Program. She didn't want her name on it. They insisted. "Because your story didn't save just one woman," they told her. "It changed what we believe is possible." One evening, a young woman stayed behind after class. "I stayed quiet for 12 years, she said. "I finally reported my manager last week." My mom's eyes filled with tears. Not with pride, with recognition. But not all healing comes from victory. Some comes from forgiveness. Not of the betrayer, but of the self. One night, sitting on her porch in Oregon years later, my mom said the words I never expected. "I forgive the woman who stayed silent." I looked at her. "She didn't know another way," she added. And in that moment, I realized something. She wasn't just free from Rick. She was free from shame. Her hair is fully gray now. Her hands shake just slightly. But when she speaks, rooms become quiet. Because her voice carries something no title ever could. Authority earned through pain. Rick will be released in 2 more years. He will return to a world that moved on without him. My mom will not be waiting, because she already left. Years ago, my mom was betrayed by a coworker. He exposed his own secret. He lost everything. But what he never understood is that when you try to erase the wrong woman, you don't destroy her. You introduce her to herself. And you. If your pain became your turning point, who would you become on the other side? Sometimes justice doesn't end with prison. Sometimes it ends with a life finally lived in truth. 3 years after the trial. 2 years after the retreat. 1 year after the Sarah program became official. My mom did something that shocked everyone. She moved again. Not because she was running from something, but because she finally realized she was allowed to move toward something. She chose a small coastal town in Maine, a place with quiet mornings, seagulls, coffee shops with mismatched chairs, and people who waved simply because they existed on the same street. For the first time in decades, she wanted a place that didn't demand anything from her. No deadlines, no supervisors, no fluorescent lights, no ghosts, just air. The house she chose was small, very small. 1 bedroom, old hardwood floors, a porch that creaked in the wind, a kitchen with cabinets painted long before she was born. When I asked her why she picked something so modest, she said, "I finally want a life that doesn't need to impress anyone." It was the simplest, most powerful sentence she had ever said. Her neighbors were older couples, young families, fishermen, artists, and one retired woman named Donna, who became her closest friend. Donna was nothing like my mom. Wild silver hair, loud laugh, 80 pairs of earrings, a dog that barked at everyone except Sarah. "I like you," Donna said on the first day. "You're quiet, but you don't shrink." My mom smiled in a way I hadn't seen in years. "Quiet isn't weakness," she replied. "That's why I like you even more," Donna said. Slowly, my mom built a new routine. Morning walks along the cliffs, coffee at the same small shop where the barista learned her name within a week, painting by the window while the ocean breathed against the shore, teaching classes online for the Women's Center in Cleveland. She wasn't running from her past anymore. She was simply no longer living inside it. But every healing journey has its final test. Hers came unexpectedly, at the grocery store. She was reaching for apples when she heard a voice behind her. "Sarah?" She froze. It wasn't Rick. It wasn't someone from the trial. It wasn't someone from her last job. It was someone she hadn't seen in nearly 25 years. Her sister, Miriam. The one she lost contact with long before the betrayal at work ever happened. The one she pushed away during the hardest parts of raising me alone. The one she never returned calls to when life became too heavy. Miriam looked different. Gray hair, lines of age, tired eyes, but the shock in her face was unmistakable. "My God," Miriam whispered. "I thought I'd never see you again." My mom felt her throat tighten. She had survived bosses, lawyers, investigations, betrayals. But family wounds are a different kind of pain, a deeper one. They sat in a small cafe around the corner. 2 sisters, 2 lives, 25 years of silence sitting between them like a third person. "I tried, Sarah," Miriam said softly. "I kept calling. I kept hoping. Then I stopped because I thought maybe you didn't want me." My mom looked down. "I didn't know how to ask for help," she said. "I didn't know how to tell anyone I was drowning." Miriam reached for her hand. "You always helped everyone," she whispered. "You just never allowed anyone to help you." That sentence broke the final layer in my mom. She cried, not from pain, but from permission. Permission to reconnect, to be loved without being needed, to rebuild without having to earn it. They talked for 3 hours. About childhood, about marriages, about mistakes, about loneliness disguised as independence. And when they stood outside the cafe, Miriam hugged her tightly. "I'm here now," she said. "If you want me." My mom's voice trembled. "I do." That night, she called me with tears in her voice. "You were right," she said. "Healing isn't just about letting go. It's about letting in." For the first time in her adult life, my mom let herself be loved without being useful. A month later, I visited her in Maine. She was standing on the porch when I arrived, wearing a soft sweater, hair silvering gently in the wind, holding a mug of tea. She looked peaceful, not the fragile kind of peace that hides fear, the earned kind, the kind that stays. We walked along the shore that evening, waves breaking softly, salt in the air, her footsteps steady beside mine. "I used to think revenge was the end," she said, "but the real ending is freedom, and the real freedom is peace." She paused. "And peace is a choice I have to make every day." My mom was betrayed by a coworker. He exposed his own secret. He lost everything. But she discovered something much bigger, that life after pain isn't just survival. It's rediscovery, reconnection, reinvention. She didn't just regain her life. She created a new one, a softer one, a truer one, a quieter one, the kind of life you never think you'll get to live until you finally stop shrinking. And you? What kind of life would you build if you finally stopped carrying the weight that was never yours? Sometimes healing doesn't begin when justice arrives. Sometimes it begins when you allow peace to stay. The last letter came in the spring, not from Rick, not from a lawyer, not from a courtroom. It came from the Department of Corrections. A simple notice. One sentence stood out. Inmate Richard Collins eligible for supervised release. My mom read it once, then again. Then she folded the letter carefully and placed it inside a book. Not in fear, not in anger, but in calm. The kind of calm that only comes when something no longer owns you. That night, she didn't say much. She made tea, sat by the window, watched the ocean breathe in slow rhythm against the dark. I waited for sadness, for tension, for the past to rise again. None of it came. Instead, she said quietly, "He's leaving prison." I nodded. "And you?" I asked. She smiled. "I already left a long time ago." Weeks passed. Nothing happened. No messages, no appearances, no ghosts. Just silence. Peaceful silence. And then one afternoon, at a small farmer's market near the harbor, it happened. She saw him. Older, thinner, the arrogance gone. Rick stood at a distance, frozen. Their eyes met. Time slowed. People walked between them. Laughter echoed. Life moved. Rick started to step toward her, then stopped. He lowered his eyes and turned away. That was it. No words. No apologies. No confrontation. No drama. Just two people standing on opposite sides of a life that would never cross again. That night, my mom sat with me on the porch. "I thought I needed closure," she said. "But what I really needed was indifference." She exhaled slowly. "And now I have it." Months later, the Sarah program opened its second location. Then a third. My mom never attended the ceremonies. She said, "The work doesn't need my face. It needs my footsteps behind the women who walk next." One warm summer evening, I found her packing a small suitcase. "Where are you going?" I asked. She closed the zipper gently. "Nowhere urgent." She smiled. "Somewhere beautiful." She no longer traveled to escape pain. She traveled to explore joy. On her last night before leaving, we sat together under the stars. No fear, no pressure, no unfinished business between us. She held my hand and said something I will carry forever. I survived when I had no choice, but I healed when I finally chose myself. My mom was betrayed by a coworker. He exposed his own secret. He lost everything, but in trying to destroy her, he unknowingly gave her the one thing she had never allowed herself before. A life that was not built on endurance, but on peace. And now, she wakes without fear, sleeps without tension, loves without bargaining, lives without shrinking. She is not a survivor anymore. She is a woman who finally belongs to herself. And you, if everything that once broke you were suddenly gone, would you recognize the life waiting for you after the pain? Sometimes the story doesn't end with justice. Sometimes it ends with freedom.